America approaches the 20th century, the problems in our country were becoming more and more obvious to many people. The problems of an unregulated society during the Gilded Age. People feared that society was devolving into chaos. And reformers, the people who sought to change the system and improve it, took the name progressives. Now, there's no clear definition of progressives. In fact, they often will have goals where they directly contradict each other. But what they do have in common is they wanted massive social and political innovation. Issues from labor rights to the role of women in society, race relations, immigration, diversity issues in general, and corporate regulation were all at the heart of progressivism, but in many cases, somebody who may have been a great fighter for one was completely indifferent or even an opponent of the other. So it's a little bit jumbled. Progressives believed that society was progressing, but they believed that the economic laws that so many people had come to have such faith in, laissez-faire, you let the market do what it will, and that's best for everybody, as well as the social laws, Darwinism, had to be controlled and directed. And generally they believed the only force powerful enough to do that was government. Major themes of progressivism would be anti-monopoly, a social cohesion, the idea that what one person does affects, or what happens in society doesn't just affect the people immediately affected, and affects everybody. A faith in both hard and soft sciences, and of course an increased, expanded role for government in people's lives. Now, in order to fix these problems, we had to be aware of these problems. And that was the role of the muckraker. A muckraker, they get their name from Teddy Roosevelt saying, they're always searching around in the muck. And they were proud of that. And what he meant, these were reporters who were going out and writing books or essays or newspaper stories, or in the case of Jacob Riis, a series of photographs, showing problems within our society. Some of them targeted trust and the unethical and sometimes brutal practices practiced by monopolists. Ida Tarbell, for example, wrote a history of Standard Oil in the 1890s, showing the way John Rockefeller had amassed his fortune. Lincoln Steffens revealed the way party machines worked in the cities, which we talked about over the last few chapters. Jacob Riis, we talked about very directly, dealt with, he showed what life was like in slums for immigrants. And of course, Upton Sinclair famously showed what the meatpacking industry was like, which upset people a great deal because it was gross. Although his intent was to show how bad it was for the workers, but what people really got out of that was that the food was bad. But these were the muckrakers. They had, their reporting gave a sense of moral outrage and an idea that society was badly broken and needed to be fixed. The social gospel is another movement here. And basically the social gospel stems from the idea that Jesus wouldn't like the United States. This is a religious movement. And it says that the America of the turn of the century, the Gilded Age period, was not terribly Christian in the way it treated its own citizens, or the way the citizens treated each other. The Salvation Army, a British-based organization, by 1900 had 3,000 officers and 20,000 privates. These were volunteers who helped the poor. And they began to, they had just gone around to the poor and preached to them. Oh, you're poor, you need to find Jesus, and then all your problems will be solved. But by 1900, they began to feed the poor with the idea that, hey, maybe we should be directly helping these people instead of just telling them to find religion. There's also a movement among clergymen, among priests and preachers and religious people who leave their churches, who walk out of their pulpits and go and they help the poor. Charles Sheldon writes a book in 1898 called In His Steps. He sells over 15 million copies. And it's from this book that I don't know if it invents the question, but it popularizes the question, what would Jesus do? That you see the WWJD so much today. And his answer was, Jesus wouldn't be sitting here in a church with wealthy parishioners coming to hear me lecture or preach every Sunday. Jesus would go out and actually feed poor people and provide assistance to them. And that's a part of progressivism. We don't think about it as being religious, but part of it certainly was. Let's talk about the settlement house movement. Progressives believe that the environment shaped individuals, that people were essentially a product of their environment. So they said the immigrants, there was nothing inherently wrong with them. They weren't some sort of genetic or moral inferiors. They were in a bad situation. And the settlement houses were created to help immigrants assimilate into American culture, learn the language, learn the culture, so they get out there, get good jobs, be successful. The first and most famous of these is Hull House, opened in Chicago in 1899 by the reformer Jane Addams. Eventually, there will be more than 400 of these throughout the United States, usually staffed by college-educated women. And this is really the dawn of social work, of educated people, usually women, dedicating their lives to going out and helping the poor, in this case, specifically immigrants. And eventually, colleges will develop majors to be a social worker, so this becomes a full-on profession. And we'll turn to the professions next.